that's pay-per-views for you. You do what you have to do to get eyeballs.
You know shit about boxing.
Hi there, welcome to the latest edition, episode 14, in fact, of You Don't Know Shit About Boxing. Brought to you by the team behind SecondsOut. I'm Danny Flexon. Normally, I'm joined by my superb co-host, Miss Georgia Banks, but she's unavailable this week. But I'm not riding solo because we have a very special guest. Adam Morallee, here you are, via the miracles of technology. Not in the studio this time around, of course, but delighted to have you. How's things going?
Yeah, all right, Danny. All right, thanks. Been with Joe a week. It's all about Joe Joyce at the moment. That's the focus of everything. So, yeah, he's back from Vegas. We got to see him, Salas, the whole team, and yeah, just off to see him again now, actually.
He seems like a quiet, unassuming sort of guy, Joe, but can he be a bit of a diva when it gets close to fight night?
Oh, really? He's very particular about certain things, like his shorts and his outfit, but he's never a diva. He's completely horizontal, like just laid back. Like I think once it's one of those lessons where, you know, if you look at all the small parts too much, you miss the big picture. I don't know if you remember when he fought Carlos Takam, he wanted to be dressed as the Juggernaut, and we never put the whole outfit together. He had great shorts, a great like kind of hoodie, sleeveless hoodie, and then he got this made for someone by him out of a yoga mat. It's like a helmet, supposed to resemble the Juggernaut, and he tried it on its own, and it looked fine. And then just as we were walking back to a ring walk, whole thing was on, put it on, still didn't notice it. And then that was back in the COVID days, so we couldn't ring walk with him. So we were kind of on the side. Joe stood up on the stage. I just turned around to Sam and said, he looks like a giant penis. And we'd never noticed it because we never put it all together. So sometimes when you're that exacting about little things, you miss the big picture. So yeah, we dressed Joe as a penis for that fight.
Unintentionally, let's point out, in case this gets clipped out, you know. We want to take you back because it's your first, not the first time on the channel, of course. So you were actually on the channel the other day, I believe, yesterday it might have been. But your first time on the podcast. Tell us a bit about how you first moved from, you're a lawyer, of course, how you first moved into boxing, I guess with David Hay at the time, and then how SJAM was formed.
Yeah, so I was involved in boxing right back from, believe it or not, 1999, when I was 23 years old, and I was a trainee at a city firm called Nicholson, Graham and Jones. And back then, boxing was seen as, I don't know how you put it, like, just not like working for PLCs. It wasn't like elite work. And one of the partners had a client who was involved in boxing, and they were like, oh, let's get the lowest of the low to work on it, which was me. And it was Frank Warren. So back in 1999, I started doing work with Frank Warren. I've told Frank about this. Obviously, he can't remember. But then I did work with Frank. Got me into understanding about boxing. And from there, as a lawyer, I continued throughout the rest of my career to do lots and lots of legal work. And I acted for a lot of promoters. I acted for Barry Hearn before Eddie was around, generally. And then started to do, around 2008, 2009, did a lot of work with Barry and Eddie when it was almost not a changing of the guard, but Frank Warren was untouchable, really, in that kind of early 2000s. There was no other promoter that, you know, he was the number one. And when Matchroom came into it, I think they were very much seen as people who've been involved in darts and snooker and the new kid on the block. You know, what they've done is phenomenal. But at that point, I remember being involved in a case before the British Board of Boxing Control in about 2008 between Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren. And I think that really was a kind of turning point, because Matchroom, obviously with Joshua, just went from strength to strength from 2010 onwards. So I knew a lot of people there, opened up my law firm, and then I worked for most of the promoters, actually. And then there came a time when I worked with David, I was really started off with David just as a lawyer. And then as I got close to David, I kind of turned into a quasi manager, started, took a percentage, just very, very small percentage. And then that made me think, actually, when you look at the space, I don't think there's many managers out there who work with lots of promoters. At the time, most managers were probably either trainers or very, very close to promoters. As you remember, you know, many promoters would also manage. That's why on the standard 4 management contract, there's a piece of paper that says, I consent to being managed by my promoter, because that happens so much. And I always thought there was space in the market for a management company that would work with lots of promoters. So that was the thought behind SJAM.
And how did you kind of know Sam Jones, and how did you actually, launch SJAM?
Yeah, so I was working with David. I was helping David set up Haymaker Promotions, because one thing I had a lot of experience of through the years was working on big pay-per-view fights and the contracts that go into that. And when you work in a very specific area of boxing for a long time, you understand, it's just kind of like industry knowledge, what a fair pay-per-view split is, where the splits start to move. Is it above 250,000 buys, 350,000, whatever? And David set up Haymaker Ringstar, if you remember.
Yeah.
And I worked on that with Richard Schaefer. And David wanted to sign, as a promoter, wanted to sign Olympians. I remember David talking to Buatsi, Akoli, and Joyce was one of them he spoke to. And Joyce had, I remember dealing with Joyce's lawyer, actually, and I was drafting the promotional agreement. And the lawyer was, I can't remember his name now, but he was good and he was difficult. And he was coming back on all the things. And then suddenly I got a call from a guy, which turned out to be Sam, basically saying, "Hi, I'm Sam. I work with Joe. Let's just get this deal done." And I thought, God, this guy's breath of fresh air. And we got the deal done on quite favourable terms for David, to be fair. And then that's how I met Sam. Me and Sam got on really well. The concept of managing Joe, like I was like, Sam, you're going to manage Joe? Like, what's going to happen with Joe? Because Sam at that point, I think, had quit his job and was kind of like in a bit of a limbo. So I don't think Sam had come to it saying, I'm going to be a boxing manager. He also effectively stumbled into it. I had started another business at the time, and we formed SJAM really to manage Joe Joyce between us. That was the original purpose of it. We then started managing Joe, and then we thought, oh, look, because at that point, I was the thing, I suppose, that I said I didn't want to be. I was managing Joe and I was involved with the promotion. And we had, I think it was like October 2017, Joe boxed a few times. I really enjoyed the management side of it because it's very different from being a lawyer. Like, if you're really a manager, you have to analyze every aspect of the athlete's performance. Is it working with their coach? Is it working with the promoter? What's their S&C like? How are they? How are they recuperating? How are they recovering? Who should they be matched with? Matchmaking at that stage of a career is really important. And then David continued to do Channel 5 shows. I helped him with that, Channel 5 and Dave shows. And then when David lost the second Bellew fight, he then kind of moved out of promoting other people at that point. And so there wasn't really a promoter to help. And we started managing a few of the guys like Cody Davies, who was on the original Haymaker Ringstar, and others. And then it really just grew from there.
And so you and Sam got on like a house on fire from the start. How much of that was due to you getting the better of him in negotiations instead of the difficult lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, it was just very straightforward to deal with. And I can't remember who that difficult lawyer was, but I remember arguing at all these points. And suddenly it was like, yeah, he's going to sign it. I was like, great, I love dealing with it.
Yeah.
But no, like that, I don't want to play Sam down. He's a very, very street smart guy. He was very street smart. And I think the reason we were a good combination was because Sam had a very good way with the boxers, could talk to the boxers. They understood him, they liked him, and he was a great talker. He is a great talker, which is why he's gone on to promote. He's a great talker. And at that stage of Joe's career, early on, I think it was very beneficial to Joe to have Sam alongside him to push him up and talk, not really on his behalf, but Joe's a very, very quiet guy, as you know. And as time's gone on, and obviously Sam and I split up last year, Joe, I think you can see Joe is coming more and more to the fore.
And this week's topic is Britain's big men. Not a new genre of porn, I must say, but a focus on the heavyweight division in the UK. And we'll start with Joe, not just because you manage him, but because he has a huge fight of his own coming up at the end of this month against Joseph Parker. what were your kind of first impressions of Joe Joyce? Because as you said, it was Sam that kind of brought Joe to the S-Jam party. You had to get to know him yourself. What was the kind of start of that relationship like?
Well, I was looking at him with David as a promoter would look at a talent, which is slightly different to management, but similar. And there was this guy with an Olympic silver medal. And even at that stage, and I think it's very unfair. But even then, when we were looking at Joe had offers in, to be fair, from Frank Warren, from Eddie Hearn, for sure. But it was like, here's this guy. Is he the next Anthony Joshua? No, he's not. Joe Joyce is very tough. He's got an Olympic silver medal, could have been a gold, but he's a bit slow. And I remember there was a guy who was kind of David's, not matchmaker, but scout. And he was like, Joe Joyce, yeah, good but slow, British level. And I think, to be fair to David thought he was very, very tough. And David pushed the boat out to sign Joe. So I think David spotted something in Joe quite early. I thought he was a terrifically nice guy, so gentle, such a brilliant guy. And I thought, when you're looking at managing someone, the personality is really important. But he was not a big talker. And I think that can be an issue when someone's not a big talker. You're thinking, okay, what makes a superstar? You can be a massive talker and, be a 7 out of 10 boxer, and you can be a superstar. But if you're not a massive talker, you literally have to be 10 out of 10, don't you, to become massive? So that was, I think, not a concern, but people did think about that at the beginning.
How much of a compensation or mitigation for that was Sam's involvement? Because you'd got to know him by this point. You saw what an eccentric character he could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, Sam was actually, right at the start, Sam was actually quite quiet. Like right at the start, he was.
I don't believe
he was pretty. It took him a little while to get into it, but then he got into it and he really liked the role. I think Sam. I remember, I would do the certain things. I remember talking to Sam about it, and Sam said he'd like to do it, and he really grew into that role. So right at the beginning, Sam actually was not that loud with Joe.
Well, and obviously you had a bit of a reputation for being quite outgoing at that point, because I remember the Hay press conference in Liverpool with Bellew was obviously your crowning moment.
Yeah, what a crowning moment. Yeah. Yeah, it was a strange time, but I mean that's pay-per-views for you. Yeah. I mean, you do what you have to do to get eyeballs. And I was telling someone this the other day, after the whole initial Will from the Inbetweeners incident with Tony Bellew, we got Jay from the Inbetweeners to come to the next press conference.
With the briefcase,
which was actually my briefcase.
Of course, authenticity.
And someone said to me the other day, words to the effect of, good job he was around. And I was like, he's a fictional character. And, we had to pay him to be there. We actually had to pay the guy to turn up. I forget what his name is. He's a big boxing fan, really lovely guy. And he got a bit of money and some ringside seats.
It's James Buckley, I believe.
James Buckley, that's right. Really lovely guy. And he brought his wife, I think maybe his little kid as well, to the fight. So it didn't just kind of happen by accident. A lot of those things.
Lucky he was there. That's brilliant.
Especially with David. David was a master of theatre, really. I don't think there's many people that have replicated just how good a talker he was with. I think if David was in his prime now, he'd be even bigger with social media. And he was a master of theatre. And I'm not saying it was all kind of put on. Some of it was, enhanced. But he was very, very good at that. And so as soon as there was a thread there, the Inbetweeners thread, right, bang, let's work that. And that guy came on and it was, it got millions and millions of views, I think.
And I've said this loads of times, but I've never said it on the podcast. And it is related, so I'm not just like crowbarring it in. But Jay's dad from the Inbetweeners, the actor that played him, taught me performing arts at college.
Oh, really?
Not just me. There was a class, but yeah. He was our teacher for a year, and then I don't think his heart was really in it, and he got sacked. But he was very funny, so,
All connected.
Talent was there all along. Joe's obviously knocking on the door now for a world title shot. There's a bit of a logjam at the very top of the division. Him against Joseph Parker, it seems like a fight he doesn't need to take. He's WBO #1. He'll get his title shot eventually. Why still challenge him at that high level? It's a risky fight.
It's very risky. And you look at Joe's activity from beating Daniel Dubois in November 2020, took him into the Takam fight. And then from that moment, you're thinking, he's the number one, but when's he going to get his title shot? And you're looking at Usyk, because Usyk could have become available kind of early 2021. We had COVID. And then I started thinking, Joe just needs to be in big fights. You look at the heavyweight division in particular, yes, getting world titles is really important, and it's what we've always set out to do. But also you sit on your ass and wait for the big fight to come along, let's say against Usyk, then you lose, then where are you? So he needs to be built appropriately and have more and more high-profile fights. So one of our targets was to make him a pay-per-view fighter. And I think this is the perfect introduction. It's a fight I've invested a lot of time in. I fought really hard to put it on. I started negotiating it really January this year, tons of ups and downs, but I always wanted it to be for an interim title, and it was never guaranteed. But the point about the WBO interim title is when Joe wins and he becomes interim champ, let's assume undisputed happens next year. Let's just assume that, and Fury wins and vacates. At that moment with the WBO, the interim gets elevated to full champion.
Okay.
And I'm sure there'll be lots of, paper champion, email champion, whatever. But Joe Joyce will be WBO heavyweight champion after 15 fights.
Yeah.
And, the stick you might get for it is overcome by that. And he should be beating Parker. I mean, beating Parker in a fight is worthy of a world title. He's a former world champ. He's one of the very top guys outside of the true elites, AJ, Fury, Usyk.
Well, also, if the title was vacant now, they would be the two selected to box for the
right. So it's not like he's going to beat someone, number 10 in the WBO and then get elevated in that way. So I will give it an air of credibility if he does get elevated. If he doesn't get elevated, the other reason for being the interim is you get a much more preferential purse split in the event of his mandatory against Usyk, if it's Usyk or Fury or whoever it may be. So there's a very big prize, Danny, in the WBO interim. That's why we took it, number one. And number two, increases Joe's reputation. When you have a pay-per-view, it is promoted more heavily and more people will know Joe Joyce. And I think in the heavyweight division, as you've seen even with Joshua now, Joshua, White, Chisora, all those guys have suffered losses, significant losses. And certainly for Chisora, it doesn't affect his marketability.
No.
And is AJ Fury going to be less of a fight if it happens because AJ lost? Maybe in kind of your eyes, Danny, or boxing purist eyes. For undisputed, it would have been amazing. But is it going to cut through to the casuals? Yeah, of course it will. I mean, after what AJ did in the ring, it's a huge fight. I don't think it's any less because he lost.
I think it might be a little bit less in that he's coming straight off the defeat. I think it's still fresh in people's minds. I think that's the only commercial kind of aspect where I'd be. Is it going
to have less views because of it?
Maybe slightly than it would have had if it was two guys for all the belts and everything else.
Yeah.
But not significantly, I mean, it's still an enormous fight, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that losses, I think, as a heavyweight, but heavyweights with big personalities, losses can affect you less. But Joe's got to get to a level where he doesn't lose. It's ultimately a big game of snakes and ladders. And so when he fought Dubois, had he lost that, the snake takes him right back down to British level. And no disrespect, but he's fighting a Nathan Gorman or Fabio Wardley if he lost that fight. But he's kept going up and up and up. And I think this isn't the final ladder for Joe by any means, but it's a very important one. Beat Parker and you show people, okay, guy's pretty elite.
Were you at all disappointed to see Dubois get his WBA regular shot before Joe got a shot at an interim or a world title?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, look, I know the Warrens very well. I think what's good for any heavyweight is a British heavyweight is good for Joe. Like when you look at the scene, I want Dubois to win world titles. I want him to be massively famous because when Joe fights him, the fight will be bigger. I want AJ to win. I want Dillian Whyte to win. I want Fury to win. They're the people I want to win because all British fights are huge. And so I want Daniel Dubois to win the WBA super belt, whatever it's called. The real world title, because one possible fight for Joe then is a unification with him. It's just you want as many options on the table as possible.
You said you want them all to win. One of the fights that's been rumoured recently is Dubois defending that belt against Dillian Whyte. Obviously, that's one where they both can't win, unfortunately. But what do you make of that fight if it goes ahead? Who would you like in that one? Who would you go for?
It's a great fight. It's a great fight. I think since Dubois lost to Joe, his rehabilitation under Shane McGuigan's been impressive. I think he hasn't quite been tested though, has he? So the reason why it's an intriguing fight is you look at, if you rewatch the Joyce Dubois fight, Joe does old man him a bit and just wins it with his lead hand. You wonder whether or not Dillian Whyte could do that. I think Dubois probably wins that. I think Dubois probably wins that fight. I think he is on the rise still. I think he probably is better now than he was when he fought Joe. And I think he's a very accomplished boxer. I think he probably wins that. But it's got intrigue. It's got experience against youth. What will Dillian Whyte do? Can he tie him up? Will he take him into deep waters? But I like Dubois in that fight.
And then at the end of October, a fight that has been made or rescheduled, in fact, is Hughie Fury against Michael Hunter. A very intriguing fight. And when it got called off, I thought, oh, that's it now. I was really disappointed. But they've made it again. It's going ahead in Birmingham now. What do you make of that one? And Hughie's potential for the top of that division as well?
I think that it is, if I'm correct, it's some sort of WBA eliminator.
Yes.
Such that
for the winner
will probably have to fight Dubois for the full belt should it be vacated.
Oh, right. Okay.
I believe, because being the WBA regular champion makes you the mandatory for the super belt. So I think it's another intriguing fight. Michael Hunter was always someone I never wanted Joe to fight, or like you think of him as kind of kryptonite for a guy like Joe, relatively short, quick. Had that good win over Bacoli, if you remember. Yeah, and then over time they've sparred. Got a lot of respect for Michael Hunter. I think it's a really, really good matchup, because I also think Hughie Fury, I mean, he takes stick for his allegedly boring style. But again, he's got a very good record, and I think Hughie Fury needs a breakthrough fight. So I think it's potentially, it'd be nice to see him win that and take on Dubois. It'd be really nice to see him win that and take on Dubois. Who have I got in that fight? Probably Hunter. I really rate Hunter, actually.
Now, we haven't forgotten about Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua, which could take place on December the 3rd, and we will be discussing that shortly. But before we do, we're going over to our man, Lean Josh Green, in the green room, so he can round up the top 5 all-British heavyweight fights in history with, Joshua Fury may challenge that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys, and welcome back to the green room. I'm here to take you through the top 5 all-British heavyweight clashes from years gone by. We've got fights from the 30s, 40s, all the way up to the modern day, and one fight from just a few months ago that may well surprise you. We'll start in the 30s with Len Harvey versus Jack Peterson. Not just one fight, but 2 fights, the first of which filled out White City Stadium at 70,000, should I say, packed into the stadium for a huge fight, and that really is an incredible attendance for boxing back in the 30s. For the British and Commonwealth titles, Harvey was withdrawn in the 12th round, 15-round fights back in those days, but withdrawn in the 12th, and in the second fight it would go to points. He managed to last the distance, but it would be a second win just 2 years on for Jack Peterson. Next up, moving on a few years to 1949, and Freddie Mills coming up against Bruce Woodcock. Mills spent most of his career at light heavyweight, but came up a few weight divisions really to the heavyweight scene to take on Woodcock, and that really was the deciding factor. Around 20 pounds the difference when they met in the ring. and the 4 knockdowns really told. It was taken to points by Mills, who was an incredibly popular fighter back in the 40s. So I say did take it to points, but ultimately it would be Woodcock who came away with the victory. Around 46,000 at the same venue at the White City Stadium for that fight. Next up, Henry Cooper against Joe Bugner from 1971. A bit of ill feeling in this one, you may have to say. Henry Cooper felt that after 14 rounds, it was all square, and they were going in. He felt that after 10 rounds, it was all square, and the next 4 rounds went to him, essentially giving him the victory. The judging referee, in that case, giving him the victory. That was not the case, and it was all square after the 14 rounds, with 1 round left, and that final round was awarded to Bugner. So he went away with the victory. Cooper retired, although he said he was going to retire no matter what the result was. He was offered the rematch 2-3 times, according to Bugner, but unfortunately it never happened again, and he did have that loss on his record. Next up, Lennox Lewis against Frank Bruno from 1993 up in Wales at Cardiff Arms Park. Hopefully we'll be going back to Cardiff in just a couple of months with Anthony Joshua against Tyson Fury, you never know. Clashed as the Battle of Britain. It was a real barn burner of a fight. Really attracted a huge amount of media attention, not just over in the UK, but abroad as well. And again, much like the previous fight, a lot of ill feeling. I think going into it, there was a lot of stories out there. And I think in the second round, the fighters had to be separated, and you could really sense the disdain for each other in that ring. And that's what made it such an attractive fight. Of course, it was Lennox Lewis. He came away with the victory fairly early on, but you'd have to put that one down as one of the greatest British heavyweight fights, if not the greatest of all time. And finally, Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte from not so long ago. Unlike the others, it was quite pally really in the lead up. They seemed to be getting on very well at the press conference and at the weigh-in, but on fight night it was full steam ahead for Tyson Fury, and he got the job done in convincing fashion. Still unbeaten, still the champion, and we may well see him again on December 3rd against Anthony Joshua. We'll have to wait and see if that one's confirmed, and maybe it will join the list, but we shall have to wait and see. Back to you, Danny.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Josh. Always a pleasure. So, Adam, we said we were going to talk about Fury against Joshua. So I spoke to Will Harvey at 258 Management early today. He said they're expecting the contract to be sent over today. They were actually expecting it yesterday, but, you know, Frank Warren likes to keep people on their toes. But he said they've accepted all the major terms. Unless anything crazy appears in the contract that they're not expecting, he fully expects them to sign. Are you surprised how quickly this has seemingly come together?
No, not really. I think in Matchroom and Queensberry and 258, you have very professional organisations. And if you have professional people who know what they're doing, when they get together in a room, they'll all be reasonable. You know, Frank Smith, George Warren, who are probably the 2 people actually driving it, both very reasonable, very smart and commercial. This is not that far away, is it? December the 3rd. In reality, for a mega fight, it's not that far away. And they both know they've got to get to it quickly. So I'm not surprised it's happened quickly. The thing I think about it, though, is that it's almost impossible. It was impossible for AJ to take a backward step from this. When Fury put it on him and said 60-40 and then 50-50 in the rematch, anything he did to avoid that would make him look like he's ducking the fight. So I kind of think, you know, when you start off, Tyson Fury, Frank Warren been quite smart there to kind of put AJ in a bit of a corner to say, you've got to take this now, haven't you? What else are you going to do? I mean, you saw Robert Garcia.
AJ in the corner.
Yeah. Nobody puts AJ in the corner. You saw Robert Garcia, and I understand this from a management perspective, like, it's not the ideal fight for AJ, is it? After losing to Usyk. It's not an ideal fight for him, but he has nothing to lose. He will be a big underdog in that fight, and it's going to be an incredible fight. I'm definitely going to watch it. But I do think that perhaps if someone doesn't actually want the matchup, there are ways to negotiate to make it fall apart. If both people really want it, I agree with Will Harvey, who's a really good guy. It'll get done very quickly because people will go, okay, you have this, you have this. For example, when you have rematches, so that let's say I don't know if it's a one-way rematch or a mutual rematch, but when you have rematches, they bring hypothetical situations into play. And so the rematch will take place, just as an example, for example, there'll be a clause in there which says if there's a rematch, it has to take place by X date.
Yeah.
Let's say 1st of February. Then what happens if one of them gets injured? You have to start negotiating about this. Okay, well, if one of them gets injured, is the other one allowed to take another fight in the interim? And then if the other one takes another fight in the interim, they've got to make sure that they get a rematch on that fight they take in the interim. Otherwise, when the other one comes back from injury and fights him, he won't have the belt. So you can go, it's not straightforward. It's complicated. And you can fall out on that. But if they both want it, it will happen. But if one of them is bluffing, that's how it will come apart.
How strongly do you fancy Fury in the fight? I'm not even going to ask who you think's going to win, but how strongly do you fancy?
I think, listen, AJ did go into the second Usyk fight for sure as the underdog on the odds. I'm pretty sure he went into the first Usyk fight as the favourite. I'm pretty sure he's gone into every fight other than the last fight as the favourite. I think he's very dangerous as an underdog. People have forgotten what his great qualities are because there's so much focus on where he's perceived to be weak. But I think Tyson Fury is a bad dance partner for him and a bad stylistic matchup. He's very tall, in box on the back foot, box at range, very difficult opponent for anyone, but very difficult for Joshua. And for sure, if you were looking at Joshua's next opponent, if you wanted to, lead him in, you wouldn't be facing someone like Tyson Fury. So I think it's I think Fury on points. He'll just get the win on points.
Agreed. So talking about those big fights coming up, we can take you over to a couple of people we spoke to earlier this week, starting with Joe Joyce, the man himself, and then Sam Jones, Adam's former business partner, good friend, not former good friend, still good friends.
Still good friend.
Yeah, ex-friend. No, just kidding.
No.
Who's got his own 2 pence to chuck in about Fury and Joshua.
Anthony Joshua has generated hundreds of millions in his career, Danny. I don't feel sorry for that. No, I don't. So I think that I think Frank Warren was saying that Eddie Hearn's no longer in the heavyweight picture, kind of poking fun at him a little bit. Well, Frank Warren's leaned out his hand and brought Eddie Hearn right back into the heavyweight title picture if this gets me, because we're going to see Eddie against Frank at the press conference. It's what we've asked for years. We've wanted to see this for years. So you're going to get a bit of everything, aren't you? You're going to get Tyson Fury, AJ. You're going to get a bit of Eddie Hearn, and Frank Warren's gloating because he's got the number one with him. It's like, we've given you this opportunity. The fight has got absolutely everything, Danny. The build-up alone is box office. So let's just hope, as fans, that we get to see this fight.
Brilliant. So it was interesting to hear from those guys. Now, Adam, you've had it fairly easy so far, some pretty softball questions. Now, normally at this point in the show, we throw it over to our audience. We get the viewers to send questions in. We didn't do that this time. Instead, we went to the S-Jam stable and we asked them for their questions for you. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear these or not. If not, I'll read them out to you. But we're going to start with Johnny Fisher, the Romford Bull.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the most surprising question from Johnny, I've got to say.
Adam, what is your favourite Chinese dish? Bosh.
I like the bosh at the end. It's like he's contractually obliged.
Contractually obliged at all times to use the word bosh.
Bosh, yeah.
Sichuan prawn, not kung po prawns, but Sichuan prawns.
Is that an important distinction? I'm not
Very
au fait.
important distinction. Bit spicier. Big John won't like that answer.
All right. So we go from the Romford Bull to the gentleman, John Hedges.
A question for Adam. All I'm thinking we could say is, trying to think of a good one, but I can't really. Ask him who is the best looking fighter at S-Jam.
Oh,
if
my.
he doesn't say me, then you've got to give him a stick for it.
I mean, what a question, Danny.
Say again?
What a question. I mean...
Well, we've all thought about it, let's be honest.
I mean, I've got to go with my... Listen, I don't want to offend anyone. All a bunch of very, very good-looking lads, but I've got to go with Guido Vianello, surely.
Oh, the gladiator. This just underlines to me that you need some female boxers at S-Jam.
Got Lisa Whiteside.
And you didn't pick her? Oh, that's bad. Maybe that says more about you than her, though.
Maybe.
Brilliant. Now we've got the big man himself, Joe Joyce. I don't know quite how much thought he put into this, but he typically puts quite a lot of thought into things. So let's see.
I might, maybe just ask him what his last meal would be.
Oh, that's a very...
Maybe he knows something we don't.
Very deep question from Joe Joyce, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it might be basically fish, like a fried fish and rice. Fried fish and rice, and then probably some sort of apple pie. Fried fish and rice and apple pie. Very boring, isn't it? But I like it.
If you're happy, mate, it's your last meal. You're not going to have any more. Let's be honest.
I don't know whether I should give some more thought to that about whether you want your last meal so you feel in a good place when you're going to be in the electric chair or something, or you don't want to be feeling too heavy, do you?
Is that how you see your death?
Roast
in the electric chair, having committed some heinous crime?
Yeah. I don't want to be feeling full. I'd rather be in a better place. So fish and rice, yeah.
Lerone Richards didn't do a voice note, but he did send a bunch of questions to the point that I asked him if he wanted to replace me as the host. But fair play for his commitment, I've got to say. A couple of them we've already kind of covered in the show, but he says, what was the first boxing fight you watched and thought, wow, I love this sport? Which is a great question.
Frank Bruno, Mike Tyson.
First one or the second one?
Second one.
Oof. Painful night that for, I mean, they were both painful nights for Bruno, but
that was like that was a real wow moment for me. Okay. Just like everything about it, just like what a sport, you know.
Now, this one, I particularly like this one, although I've got a feeling he's got some self-interest here. He says, make a boxer from the S-Jam stable, and he's listed 7 different attributes. So you've got to obviously take one from each. Or just give them all to Lerone, which is, I'm sure, what he wants. So starting with power.
She's terrible, Danny. She's terrible. Whatever I say, I'm going to get in big trouble, aren't I?
I think he'll
Tommy
forgive
Fletcher.
I think Lerone will forgive you for not picking him for power, maybe. Speed.
Lerone.
Accuracy.
Lerone.
It's getting his way, isn't it? Work rate.
Probably Joyce.
Yeah, I would say Joyce. Skills.
Well, that's another Lerone Richards question, isn't it? Like, Lerone's just done this to himself.
These are typical attributes, to be fair.
Yeah.
Footwork.
I'm going to say Guido.
Endurance.
Joyce.
That's it. They're the 7.
And anyone I haven't mentioned.
Makeups and
a very close second in there. Johnny Fisher, definitely a close second for power, I think.
Yeah. I thought Hedges on a couple of the skill-based ones could have been
Hedges, Dakers, actually hugely most underrated member of the S-Jam stable, Sol Dakers.
Yeah, that wasn't on Lerone's list, unfortunately. But Look, Lerone carefully curated that list.
There was like another question: who would win in a street fight between all the S-Jam fighters? That's easy.
Well, go on.
Florian Marku. he takes 5 of them out instantly.
Would they gang up on each other? That's the thing as well. Would little cliques form?
Maybe, but Florian would just be taking 4 people out straight away, just with a broken bottle, probably.
Nice. We've got you in the electric chair. Florian like killing all his stable mates with a bottle. Brilliant. What's going on at S-Jam?
I know.
Since Sam left.
I know. What's happened?
Dear. All right, well, we thank you all for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment below. Let us know what you think of crazy stuff that Adam's been coming out with. Obviously, agree with everything that I said. Adam, really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, we'll get you in the studio next time around.
Definitely.
Best of luck with the rest of preparations for Joe's big night.
Cheers, Danny.
Cheers, mate. Take care. Yo, Danny Flexon here. Think you know shit about boxing? There's only one way to find out. Listen to the full podcast via one of the links in the description or go to secondsoutboxing.podbean.com.
You know shit about boxing.